Hey friends, Pastor Bill Walden here with Build Up the Church. Hope you're doing great. God bless you. This is a devotional word for November 15th, 2024, and this is Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. We saw in Hebrews chapter 11 a great list of faithful people of God who believed the promises of God. They received the promises of God. They believed them. They chose to believe the promises of God more than their own emotions or more than their own fears or more than their own inability to understand how God was going to accomplish what he said he was going to accomplish. And so, as I have mentioned before, sports teams have the Hall of Fame. Even rock and roll musicians have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Hebrews chapter 11 is the Hall of Faith. It's a great group of people who left a witness. Their lives were a witness to what a life of faith can look like. The author here now picks up the idea and applies it to his readers. And we remember that Hebrews is a book about people who had been Jews before. They were ethnically Jews, religiously, spiritually Jews. They had come to Christ, but they were struggling with the idea about the difficulty of following Christ. Some of them were being persecuted, and they were thinking about and considering going back to Judaism. And so the author here has been telling them about the superiority of Jesus Christ, the superiority of the priesthood of Jesus Christ. And here he talks about pressing on in the faith. And so verses 1 and 2, he says this in verse 1, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore we also, in a like manner of those in Hebrews chapter 11, who pushed through in faith, even though they were persecuted, even though they were losing things, even though some of them were killed, they pushed forward in faith. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, and he seems to be referring here to those witnesses, or martyrs is the Greek word, not only those who die for their faith, in faith, but those who are witnesses. The word martyr really means a witness, and some witnesses are killed for their faith, others are not. But he's saying, since we are surrounded by so many other people of God, other Christians, he almost describes it, and he's going to go on to talk about this like a race. He almost describes it as those who have run their race, and now they're sitting in the grandstands of heaven cheering us on. That might be a little bit of a loose application of that, but it's kind of that idea that others have run this race before us, therefore we can run the race as well. Verse 1, once again. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, since they made it, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. In order to be successful in a race, you have to be unencumbered. In the Olympics, you see runners just wearing the lightest bit of clothing, the lightest shoes. Even swimmers in the Olympics for a while there were shaving their bodies to get rid of resistance in the water from the hair on their bodies. You want to be as slim and mean and agile as possible to run the race. So he says here, the author says, lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. He talks about two things. Sin is sin. It's obvious what he's talking about there, things that are clearly contrary to the life of a Christian all the time. Drunkenness, sexual immorality, lying, cheating, defrauding other people, being a hypocrite. Those things are clearly to be laid aside. Those are the sins that can so easily trip us up. But he also says this, also let us lay aside every weight. Seems to be less of a kind of malignant word. It's less of a really sinful word, but weights can slow us down. You know, if we want to run the Christian life, obviously sobriety is important. But you can also be hindered in running your race by collecting baseball cards and spending so much of your time collecting baseball cards, or having a hobby that is all consuming, where first thing you wake up in the morning, you're thinking about the hobby, you stay up late at night, you're researching things online, so on and so forth. Things that in and of themselves are not bad, but they become a weight to us. even family. It's great to love our family and love parents and love kids and grandkids and grandparents and all of that. But if there's too much of a priority placed on family, it can become a weight that takes our affection and our love and our heart and our attention away from Jesus. And so we need to be careful of both the things that are obvious and maybe the things that everybody else would say, oh, that's okay, you need a little diversion. I would agree, a little diversion is okay, as long as it's a little diversion. If it's a big diversion, it needs to be laid aside. And so we need to determine those things and ask for God's help to determine those things. He says, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Isn't that the truth? Sin can just trip us up. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I like that Paul says, let us run. He doesn't say you guys run. He says, let us run. He says, I'm in it with you. We all have to run a race. And we all have a particular race that's set before us. Some as caregivers, some as businessmen or businesswomen, some as missionaries, some as pastors, some as construction workers. We all have a lane that God has given us to run in. I don't want to run in other people's lanes, and sometimes I try. Sometimes their lane looks better than mine, or my lane seems to have too many obstacles or something like that. But we all have a life that God has laid out before us, and we need to run that race, and we need to do it with endurance, with a determination. And he tells us how to do that successfully, verse 2, looking unto Jesus. When sprinters especially are running the 100-meter dash, they're looking at that finish line. They're not looking in the stands. They're not looking over their shoulder. They're looking at that finish line. And the way to be successful, if you will, in the Christian life is to not be looking at all the weights and the sins and the things that people have done to you and recounting them and rehearsing them and thinking about them all the time. That hinders you from running your race. And everybody's been hurt. Everybody's a victim. Dear brother, dear sister, get your eyes on Jesus, not on the weights and snares. Sometimes we put weights on ourselves. Sometimes people put weights on us. We've been victims of something. But the author here says, fix your eyes on Jesus. And it's the idea of turn your eyes away from everything else and looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. He's the one that designed our faith, if you will. He's the one that completed. If you could say it this way, he was the first Christian. I heard a commentator say one time, this idea is like if there's a group of people going through a thick jungle, and there's somebody in the front with a machete, and he's cutting through. He's the trailblazer. He's the first one. That was Jesus, the first one to complete the faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and he has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The joy of knowing you, the joy of knowing me, the joy of saving us. He saw that it was worth it, and he ran with endurance. Jesus ran with endurance. Paul ran with endurance. You have to run with endurance. I have to run with endurance. So to make that easier, lay aside some things as God might show you. People might tell you to that hobby is too busy for you or this or that, and maybe they're right, maybe they're not. You need to figure that out with the Lord. Lay it aside. Certainly lay aside the sin that can so easily trip us up, and then set your eyes on Jesus and run your race. So some things to think about. Hope it helps. Thanks. Bye-bye.